In the last 7 election cycles, the economy has headed in an upward direction afterwards, regardless of which party got elected. It's the uncertainty leading up to that that's more paralyzing. And in the other 2 cycles, the effect of the post-election economic downturn wasn't even that big. Those who would be worried about the effect of the 2024 election, I'm not saying it can't happen. There's just not any historical precedent that that's what causes it. But I see it in pretty good shape overall, because inflation fears have, and by the way, I know in this season, there are always people who are not doing well. And I'm not saying that everybody is exempt from this, but a lot of people are doing very, very well.
Yeah. Episode 16. We've made it here.
We've made it.
What a big time. 16, that's kind of like a big number.
Hold on.
16 years old?
Hold on, Frank.
Yeah.
Frank, stop.
Okay.
What is this?
What? I just thought we needed some props for the show today. I mean, we've got a good topic today. I just was adding some decorations. I mean, we're down here at Sweetfish Media, and they have a great studio, but a little extra decoration today. Yeah.
Why this episode?
Why this?
I mean, why does this come out right now?
Yeah.
I mean, you opened up the show the episode like there's nothing here. This is sitting right here.
All right. I mean, you're a Georgia Bulldog. I'm a fan of the best college team in the nation, the University of Tennessee, and we're playing each other in just
Coming
2
up,
weeks.
right, when this episode comes out, we'll be playing each other.
We're getting ready to, so I just figure...
Got it.
Yeah, we need to go ahead and own the fact that we're going against each other, and it's going to be a great game for us.
What about this episode? Let's just go into the episode.
Hey-o. We'll see where it goes. Like, that's it. You want to, you know what we should do to start this episode? Scoring prediction.
Oh, gosh.
Yeah, not a single game is gone. Let's just go ahead and guess. Scoring prediction.
Why do you even want to
just
go
pick
there?
a number. This will be fun. Like, well, I mean, don't insult my team.
I'm not going to let you think you're going to win.
Yeah, so
you're not going to let me think we're going to win.
Right.
So let's just go at it.
Yeah,
right?
That's it.
I'm going to go 31-17, Georgia.
31-17. I'm going to go 24-21, Tennessee.
Wow.
Yeah, field goal at the end.
I hope your defense is that good, because that's some horsepower they're going to be holding back.
That's it. Yeah, It's going to rain out again like it did last year. It was like really sluggish, and so maybe it'll slow down the offense.
Did we just not talk that week? Is that why we're...
You know what? We're going to talk the whole week leading up to it. We might just need a few days break after the game. That'll be it.
In the meantime.
I don't know that anybody else cares about this.
No, they don't. We do. But we do have a great episode today.
We love you.
That's probably 2 great teams leading into a great episode. That's the
great episode.
That's what you were really trying to do here.
Yeah, and actually, this wasn't intentional at all, but for one of us, we are going to feel kind of like the episode we're talking about today. We're talking about in the church, how do you navigate a financial crisis? And so for somebody, they're going to be pretty devastated. Football crisis. Yeah, so maybe that's a tie-in.
Yeah.
But we're just saying,
though. I do love the topic.
How do we navigate this?
Love this topic, right? You know, I'm a financial guy by training and background. And so the whole idea of managing well so that you can survive challenges when they come. Crisis, if it gets that bad, I think that's just a hot button topic for us to weigh in on, and I love that we're going to talk about that.
And just being wise, right? At the end of the day, it may be preparing and being responsible if something were to happen, but the reason we bring it up is we're at election season. People get weird about their finances and how they're going to save and how they're going to spend and how they're going to give. We're at a unique inflection point in our economy. We've been that way for a couple of years, and there's been all these questions on, is this going to change, or is this part of the market going to change? A little bit of instability around our world. And so all of that kind of puts pressures to go, how do we as a local church prepare and handle those things in addition to any kind of turmoil we may have inside our church or, kind of unique seasons. So I think it's a wise thing for us to talk about. I think based on my time with you, you have a very unique perspective on this because you have some data-driven insights. You've seen the church, the capital C church and local churches navigate really big things. Of course, COVID, 2008, huge, and many things before that, because you've been around a little while.
A minute.
And so it's been a minute.
A hot
and
minute.
So, and yet, I think you've seen and observed some kind of unique things of how the church kind of prepares or gets nervous about things and really reality and how it actually plays out in church world.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, and I think other people had this experience as well, before I learned not to be afraid of the dark, I was afraid of the dark. There was a closet in my bedroom, and I was afraid of the booger man that was in that closet. Mm-hmm. And I think that's how we, and my dad would always just turn the light on and just say, hey, see, there's nothing in here.
Yeah.
There's nothing in here. And I do that to draw a parallel to say a lot of the things we worry about in terms of financial calamity never happen.
Yeah.
Never happen.
Yep.
They don't happen. So let's just take 2008, 2009, for example. I mean, 2008 was an amazing end of the year because all of the economic indicators were just going south. I remember looking at my, retirement plan, and like my 401k became a 301k, and then it became a 201k. It just didn't become a 101k. And of course, it's all recovered and better than ever, right? But it was an unprecedented time. There was a lot of fear and anxiety about what could happen into our church. And the truth of the matter is, Frank, a lot of churches did well, a lot of churches didn't do well, and a lot of churches stayed about the same. Mm-hmm. And what was happening in 2008 and 2009 was not the determining factor. It was really how healthy their church was, right?
Yeah.
So, what economic calamity does is just pushes you in the direction you were already going. So if you were already teetering on the edge, it's going to throw you off the edge. So don't come telling me about all these churches that don't have good giving, because I've been around long enough to have heard the backstory on most of them, and it's not the crisis of 2008 and 2009. It's all the things that were already brewing in their church up till then, and that just tipped them over. Same thing in COVID, Frank.
Yeah.
I mean, who would have thought that we could have that thrown at us? And, I'm not one who actually gets a little uptight about this stuff. Mm-hmm. And I did in April and May of 2020. I'd never seen that. Mm-hmm. I didn't even know what a pandemic was. I had to look and figure out what the difference was between an epidemic and a pandemic. I know that now. Mm-hmm. I didn't know the difference. But
I got you.
Yeah, you follow what I'm saying. Yeah. But who would have thought that the church in America, could come through something like the pandemic? And really, most of us did pretty well. A few didn't. Mm-hmm. Most of the ones that I know of that didn't do well, they weren't doing well before that, and it just tipped them over.
Yeah.
Right? Election cycles. In the last, I believe this is correct, in the last 7 election cycles, the economy has headed in an upward direction afterwards, regardless of which party got elected. It's the uncertainty leading up to that that's more paralyzing. And in the other 2 cycles, the effect of the post-election economic downturn wasn't even that big.
Yeah.
So, those who would be worried about the effect of the 2024 election, I'm not saying it can't happen. There's just not any historical precedent that that's what causes it. We're actually in pretty good shape overall.
Yeah.
I mean, we're sitting on the likelihood, probably will have happened by the time this releases, but we're sitting on the likelihood of a Fed interest rate cut. Right. Because inflation fears have, and by the way, I know in this season, there are always people who are not doing well. That's not, and I'm not saying that everybody is exempt from this, but a lot of people are doing very, very well.
Yeah.
Right. And so our fears are not as founded. There's not really any significant indicators that our economy could tank. There's not. And it's important to remember, I studied finance in college. Mm-hmm. There are natural economic cycles, and what happened in 2008 and 2009 was not an economic cycle like we studied in school. It was man-made because it was really the crash of the subprime lending market that caused all of that. Yeah. Right? And you had all of these loans that were stuck in the system, and the system had to get all of that out, like having a bad infection in your body. Mm-hmm. You got to get all that infection out of your body before you can actually get healthy again. Yeah. So that wasn't even a typical economic cycle. Mm-hmm. It was man-made because, we're making no no documentation, no income verification loans to people who, make $40,000 or $50,000. We're loaning them $200,000 and then wondering why it got foreclosed.
Right.
That's not even kind to do that. That's a whole other conversation, but it's not even kind because you're setting them up for failure.
Yeah.
And then you package those in securities and sell those. And our system is built on a lot of those being there, not today, but they were then. And you just had to get all of that out of the system. It was like a bad case of dysentery, if I can say it that way.
So even with that, what we see is that part of the fear is what could all these economic pressures and things showing up and affecting us, whether it be political issues or whatever. You're saying that, hey, a lot of that normalizes. The church kind of makes it through all those things. We've made it through difficult things before. We will make it through difficult things ahead. Like we're going to be fine. And many of those things that we think are going to be very difficult end up being kind of speed bumps. Once again, not for everybody, but a majority. But one of the things that creates that fear and anxiety is for some churches, they're not sure if they've saved properly, prepared properly, if they're budgeting properly to navigate a tough schedule, a tough time, a tough season. And so I think some of that fear comes from I don't know what I don't know, and I don't feel like I'm prepared for whatever I don't know is. But with some minor changes that may take some time to install or develop, I think we can mitigate a lot of that fear and concern by maybe managing the church a little differently.
Yeah. So before I dive into that one, I want to just tag one more thing to the end of what I said previously, because I love the direction we're going, but I think I need to get this on the table first. If we have risk, financial risk, it's more likely in the four walls of our church and not out there somewhere. You follow what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Because and I'm not talking about these massive moral failures. We've seen several of those this year. I'm not talking about one of those. But if your pastor just burns out, and it's like, I need to leave ministry. I just need for me to be healthy. I just need to leave. There's not a big moral failure.
Yeah.
But he's well loved. He's preached. Everybody loves him. You're going to go through a season of turmoil.
Sure.
Because whether we like it or not, we can say the church is not about the pastor, but the pastor's voice, the pastor's leadership does have, it is a factor in a lot of people deciding if that's where they want to be or not. The way he teaches the word.
Yeah.
Right? If you've got a guy who's really good at wielding the word of God in a way that just tears your heart open on a regular basis, and he steps down because he's burned out, you might leave and go find another church, and there might be a lot of people like you, and that's going to affect the finances of your church, which is why I say, if you're an elder, if you're on the board, if you're an overseer in your church, your meetings should be more about the care of your pastor than you're concerned about the finances of your church.
Yeah.
You should not be leading off elders' meetings talking about finances and things like that. That should be the second conversation. You should be saying, Pastor, how are you doing?
Yeah.
Because for two reasons. Number one, that's the right thing to do. That's part of your job as an overseer, to pastor your pastor well.
Yeah.
Right. But the second thing is, if you're talking about risk, you have a lot more financial risk if he fails than if you do in anything else, including a pandemic. Right. So the conversation that you're introducing is the conversation of wisdom in managing finances in the church, just wisdom.
Yeah.
I don't want to go into, budgeting and all those other things, because that's a deeper conversation. We may take that on in another episode somewhere. But I want to talk about the idea of creating margin and not spending every single dollar that you have coming in.
Yeah.
You wouldn't run your house that way. Don't run your church that way, right? So that when trouble comes, you've got some acorns, my words, stored away from the South. We talk about acorns because we despise squirrels, but squirrels do store up acorns. You have acorns stored away for when bad weather comes. That's what squirrels do, right? You have money socked away. You have reserves, an appropriate level of margin. So you're not spending every dollar, and you're putting money away so that when it comes, you've got some margin, right?
Yeah, but I don't want to lack faith and not spend that thinking that God won't provide. Yeah. Right? That's the response to that of going, well, I don't want to have too many acorns in the storehouse, because I'm like, no. That people are giving to mobilize this for kingdom impact. And so I'm agreeing with you, by the way. I'm just challenging the thought. And this is the thinking of like, well, I don't want to put back too much. I want to mobilize it for ministry and have faith that the resource will come as need be. And or I don't really know how much I'm supposed to set aside or manage for margin. And so you put yourself in a situation of going, okay, we've under reserved, under prepared for margin. So how do we set a benchmark? How do we plan for margin? What's acceptable? What have you seen in churches that seem to be helpful?
Yeah, so I want to tackle this whole idea that I hear a lot of times. Guys will say, well, Jim, why would I worry about socking money away? I just have faith God will provide. Mm-hmm. Look, Frank, there's an appropriate place for faith, and there's an over-application of faith. Yeah. You're not going to go stand out in the middle of this road out here with all the traffic coming by and have faith that one of those cars is not going to hit you. Yeah. Now, I know this may be an exaggeration, but follow me on this. Mm-hmm. You can't just do that, because having reserves, managing your money well inside the life of the church is not a lack of faith. It's applying good stewardship, wisdom, understanding, and discernment. Yeah. So let's get that off the table. But then the question becomes, well, what's the right amount? I think that's what I heard you asking.
Yeah. I need how do I do
some, but what's too much?
Right.
I'm going to give you my take on it. It doesn't mean it's the answer. It's just kind of my take, watching this from over a long period of years, and having, finance and accounting is kind of my background. And the context and circumstances of a church might determine where you fall on this. Sure. I think no less than 2 months worth of operating expenses, even as a church plant. Mm-hmm. I try to tell church plants to have a couple of months of margin on reserve in case something happens. If you're in the South and you have a snow Sunday, in the North, doesn't matter if it snows in Minneapolis, they get it out of the way and they go to church. Mm-hmm. Here in the South, a quarter of an inch and we shut down for 3 days. Right. And if that's a Sunday and you miss a giving Sunday and you're living hand to hand, it's going to cause you fear and anxiety because you're living paycheck to paycheck, basically. Right. So have at least a couple of months worth of reserves. If your annual income is, let's just say if your annual income, you're a small church, $600,000, 1 month would be $50,000, have $100,000 minimum. I would rather see it be 3 or 4 months.
Yep.
There are cases where you could go to 5 or 6. I really think those are not the norm, and certainly not more than 6, because here's why. Then givers can begin to say, Pastor, you're hoarding money. I wanted this to go to ministry.
Yeah.
So there's an appropriate, in your context, there's an appropriate level to set aside. And there's a level that becomes hoarding, for lack of a better word. You're a little bit too fearful.
Yeah.
Right? Because here's the thing. Between 2008 and 2009, I didn't see a lot of churches use reserves then. And even during COVID, I didn't see a lot of churches use reserves. I remember a church, one of the clients of the firm, and I think it was June of 2020. So we were in that season in COVID. Remember when we say in COVID, well, I don't know, this could last a while. This might last to Labor Day.
Right.
It might not be.
Yeah.
How stupid was that?
Originally, it was 2 weeks. Then it was maybe it'll make it a month. Summer.
This could go to Labor Day. This could last all summer.
Yeah.
Right. So in June, we really didn't know. We didn't know. And I had a client of mine who had good reserve policies. And he's saying to me, hey, Jim, do you think we ought to tap into our reserves? And I said this. I said, well, it seems to me that reserves are meant for a rainy day. And if it ain't raining right now, bro, I don't know when it is. Yeah. Right? Because and so this would be a time when you use reserves to stave off, panic and anxiety, because you've stored that money away. Yeah. Not for a pandemic, because you didn't know that, but for a rain. It ended up, they only tapped it like 1 or 2 times.
Yeah.
Minimally.
Yeah.
Minimally.
Yeah.
And I think they probably replenished it pretty quickly.
Sure.
Because what happened with them and with a lot of churches is it really didn't affect them that much. In fact, their income may have gone down like 2 or 3%, maybe.
Yeah.
But because they weren't holding church, their operating expenses went down 17%.
Right.
So they're just socking money away.
Sure.
In a season where you're like, well, I'm not sure what we're going to do, but in the meantime, right?
Yeah.
So I just don't know that there's a bigger shot. You know, if you're talking about a bigger punch, you can't take a bigger punch than a pandemic, and that didn't do it.
Right.
But churches that experience failure inside, toxic leadership, other kinds of things, those call into question with givers and people who are faithful to your church. Wait, what's going on here?
Poor change management.
Right?
Poor communication of stewardship. Those things will start to they'll look like being irresponsible with funds or something like that. Not necessarily a moral scandal or anything like that. It's just like, wait a second, I'm going to pause. I need to understand. Those things certainly come up.
What we're saying here is the question that the question is, what about financial crisis and challenge? But the bigger question is, how do you manage the money in your church in the first place?
That's exactly right.
Because that's what's will allow you to get through this.
So a church doesn't have proper margin. Let's go there. If they have excess margin, maybe we get there. Maybe we talk about that or not. Okay. But they don't have proper margin. What do they do? What steps do they take to get to proper margin? How urgent should they feel if they don't have those couple months? Like, should they be slowing down some ministries? Should they be, is it Dave Ramsey? Like, we're selling our cars and selling the church vans and really throttling back? Or do we give ourselves a timetable to say we should be able to get there within the next 3 months, 6 months? Practically, and I know there's a million different scenarios, but I'm going, how do you get this fixed if you don't feel like you have proper margin for rainy days, for difficult things that may come?
I like the idea of setting the time frame, right? Because the gap you have may be that you need 6, 8, 10, 12 months to get there.
Yeah.
But make a plan to get there ASAP.
Yep.
Don't keep just, hoping this is all going to work out. I believe in hope, but it's just not a great strategy. It's not a good strategy.
Yeah.
Make sure that you have a plan to put aside the reserves so that you can get there and stave off anything that might come your way without resorting to panic and fear.
Yeah.
That's what's going to get you there, right?
Yeah.
The other thing too, Frank, is particularly if you're an established church and you have buildings, make sure that you have an appropriate, this is apart from emergency reserves, what I call capital reserves. You're going to have to repair those buildings.
Yeah.
You're going to have to put a new roof on at some point.
New HVAC.
Your new
flooring,
HVAC.
whatever it may be.
Those things have life expectancies. And if you know what the life expectancy is and what the replacement cost is likely to be, let's just say you've got $300,000 worth of HVAC, and let's just say it's at your big church, and you've got a 15-year life expectancy. You need to be setting aside $20,000 a year to replace that when the time comes due. So when the bill for the HVAC comes, you're like, oh, I've got the money.
Yeah.
If you've got a roof, roofs are 25-year, life expectancy typically. So if your roof is $750,000, that's probably a pretty big church. Let's just say it's $250,000 for your roof. That would be $10,000 a year for 25 years for capital reserves. So you have capital reserves that are a line item in your budget. So in other words, you're planning for those things so that when those expenses come up, then boom, you can actually fund those. Now, what happens when the unexpected repair? That's why you have emergency reserves again, so you can do those kinds of things. Same thing you would do if you were following the Dave Ramsey Financial Peace University plan and running the baby steps. You've got that on deposit locally, so when stuff comes, your car breaks down, you've got the money to take care of it.
Okay, so we need a plan. And if you don't have a plan, build a plan. You've got elders, you've got leadership, you've got business leaders in your church. They can help you figure that out, candidly.
You most likely have a CPA somewhere in your church.
Absolutely. We can figure it out, put them to work. They'll gladly volunteer and serve. That's no problem. So I want to pivot just a little bit. We may be fine. We may know that we've got some margin. We'll weather this storm. Lots of people are going to be nervous about this election. So we may be fine. The church may be fine. But the feeling in the congregation is that who knows what's about to happen? What's going on? At what point is it appropriate to reassure the congregation that the way we handle finances puts us in a good place to weather a storm if one comes, although we're not so worried about that storm coming. So we can't be so cavalier to go, we're fine. Like at some point, the congregation needs to know, or is it just the people that ask and we tell them, or should we from the pulpit from time to time when the community, when the world, when the news is conveying we're in a crisis, which feels like it's like all the time now, there's some crisis. How do we communicate that we're doing okay? Your giving here is being managed well, it's being handled well. Where does that messaging come in? Where is it appropriate? Because once again, what their reality of what they're feeling may not reconcile or even be a concern for the church, but may still need to be addressed.
So let's go back to our conversation about that 3 minutes in the worship service. Yeah. We covered that several episodes ago. The giving moment where I talked about the idea there's 3 things you want to talk about during the year. One of them is mainly spiritual lessons, 32 times a year. And then the impact stories of how we're doing stuff, 32 to 36 times a year, and then 12 to 16 times a year. Here's what happens when you give, and then 4 times a year, trust. I would weave it into that conversation right there. Somebody from our board, our elders, our oversight, somebody who comes up like, hey, my name's Jim. My background's accounting and finance. I lead the team on our elders that oversees finance for our church. Let me just cover a couple of things for you this morning. And that might be one. Hey, you might be wondering, how do we manage our church so that if hard times come, that we're in a position? Well, let me just tell you what our philosophy is and how we do that, right? That's where I would put it.
I love that. And
I think it's very reassuring, right?
Absolutely. And if I could add one thing to that, I think once you get to a place where you have margin, and when we see that the community may be going through a hard time, so maybe it's a community-specific issue, a plant shuts down or something like that. So, the community is feeling it. Maybe not the whole local church across the nation is feeling it, but a community is feeling pressure. Getting ourselves to a place of margin and getting ourselves to a healthy place where we can weather a storm then means that we have capital available for outreach too, to help others navigate it when they're jarred or the community is in need. So if the congregation is feeling financial pressure and feeling like things are uneasy, how is the church able to respond in those crises by meeting needs? Can be a great thing to say, hey guys, just so you know, the church is in a really solid place right now. In fact, we're taking some of our savings to go do X, and actually say, hey, we're here to respond. We're here to meet these needs. Can be really beneficial to say, hey, we're here. We're ready to navigate this. What about this? What about a difficult transition has occurred? Okay, change management has not gone well. There's been a difficult transition. The congregation knows that the church is in a tough spot. How do you navigate saying we're in a tough spot, but we got a plan? Does that come from the elders? What other ways? What frequency are we saying that? Because we got new people coming to the church. They don't want to come in and think that everything's falling apart. Where do you approach something like that?
Yeah, I think that needs to come from the board, your elders, whoever's doing oversight. Probably doesn't need to come from the staff. They need to step in and just say, hey, look, we see what you see, and here's our plan to make it through there. Right? Yeah. And, again, that's the kind of thing, Frank, that you have to plan for that in advance. That's just what I talk about in wisdom and overseeing how you manage your money. That's the bigger issue of how you make it through a time like this. Yeah. You've got to set yourself up to succeed. So not that you just take a hit on the side and you just go down. Yeah. You come out and you can still figure out your pathway forward.
I think that's great. That's great insight. I would say no one, I don't think it's a bold statement. None of you that are listening, if you are going through a difficult time or a difficult season of change right now, none of you are experiencing something that someone else hasn't already navigated. And so you should be looking to someone else to help you navigate it, know what to say, know how to manage it, know how to communicate to the congregation. Someone's already had to navigate this. So there's nothing new to navigate. So it's like leaning in on that wisdom and gaining some insight so you're not having to invent it for yourself, I think could be really helpful.
Yeah, and here's the other thing I'm thinking, Frank, and talking through this right now. I don't want to go too deep on this because this is that deeper issue of how you set up all of your finances and whatnot. But the thing I see churches do that makes it hard for them is they end up committing too much to the combination of people and buildings, right?
Yeah.
And the number one category is having more mortgage than you can really afford. You can make the payments, but just because you can make the payments doesn't mean you can afford it.
Yeah.
So, for example, churches will ask me, "Hey, Jim, what's the right amount of salary percentage?" I don't know. What's your ministry model? I mean, there's lots of factors in that.
Sure.
What's the right amount of debt? Well, I don't know. How much do you spend on salary? What does that have to do with it? Well, here's what I can tell you. If you're spending 43% on salary, you've got more room to take on mortgage than a church who's spending 54% salary, right? Because what you're doing is the combination of buildings and people, so your staff cost and your building cost, including mortgage, is a fixed expense that it's really hard to cut into that when hard times come. So you can't cut back. You already got that. And I see churches that when I'm looking at their numbers, I see that and I do the math, I was like, there's the staff and there's the building and there's the mortgage. Whoa. That's 86% of what they're taking in on a monthly basis. I'm not saying you can't make that work, but I wouldn't want to try to make that work. 14% for everything else.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it hard. So if you've got that and you're not reserved when hard times come, it makes it really challenging for you because you don't have any room to cut back. Your first cut is going to be muscle.
Yeah.
You don't have fat.
Wow. That's good.
Your first cut is going to be muscle.
Yeah.
And it's probably going to be, you can't do much about the building because the bank's like, hey, you got to pay me and you got to operate those buildings.
Yeah.
So it's probably going to be staff. And that means you're going to cut somebody that you really need. Your first cut will be a necessary person. And that just hurts, man.
Yeah.
That hurts. And it disrupts momentum. It calls into question leadership. It does things that you don't think it's going to do. All because you hit a little rust patch in the road and you had not exercised good wisdom in putting your church in a good place before that.
That's so good. Thank you for that insight, Jim. I'd say this, when the nation or the community is going through a financial crisis, there's something very encouraging and helpful when we see that the church is doing okay. When everything else feels unstable, when the church is stable and feels like it's in a good place, that can be really reassuring when it feels like the rest of the world's falling apart. When 9/11 occurred, and all the doors to churches were opened up and full that following Sunday, right?
Yeah.
Everybody was looking for some hope, some stability, some reassurance. And so I think this idea of stewardship and navigating financial crisis, how we speak about it, how we position ourselves is critical, because we are saying that Jesus is the rock and the anchor and stability, and they're looking for the church to help bring some of those same realities to their life and world. And so whether it be what we preach about, what we speak about when it comes to the financial crisis that we see around us and the potential or looming stresses around us, for the church to be in a position where we're being wise and having some margin. And once again, in a future episode, we'll talk about budgeting, and we could go into where can you get creative in the way that you set aside and plan to build. And that may mean delaying something you want to do now to get a little bit more margin so you can be stable in the long term. Like, working through those things together, I think, will be really critical.
Yeah, and I think the whole idea for me, Frank, I love the idea of the church inspiring confidence because it's calm in the face of, chaos.
Yeah.
Right? Keeping your head when all around are losing theirs.
That's good.
William Dunn, the line from his poem, right? Keeping your head when all around are losing. That should be the mark of the church. That should be the witness of the church. That when everyone else is like losing their mind, the church is like, no, I think we've got this. We've managed well, but more importantly, we've got God on our side, right?
That is so good.
And that's a really cool thing, that the church could actually be a model, be an example, and be a witness in a time like that.
Yeah. That is so good, Jim. I mean, at the end of the day, everyone, we want to serve you well. And we know that without a doubt, that there are people that feel like they're in a financial crisis or that one is looming.
Yeah.
They've watched enough news, no matter what network, it doesn't matter. Something's about to unravel, right? And so they're feeling that pressure. So what we want to do is be a steward of what God's entrusted to our care and be able to find healthy ways to communicate that give confidence and stability to our congregation. We hope you found this episode helpful. We just want to be practical. We want to give some insights here. Guys, thanks so much for listening next Sunday. We'll see you again real soon.